Hello, this is Laura coming to you again with part 2 of understanding Asperger syndrome. Trying to understand your friend or family member with Asperger syndrome may sometimes feel like trying to cut through the darkness with a plastic lightsaber. Understanding this is not a difficult matter, and as I mentioned before, there is of course this magical triad of impairment. But beyond that, I want to mention that most of the metaphors that I used in the last video, I know them, and other people know them because they've heard them repeatedly. When someone develops a new metaphor, we don't always get that right away. In fact, I don't get it at all most of the time. It's very hard for me to tell when people are joking or whether they're serious. And that's also one of the traits that we share. Some are better than others. Some of the greatest creative genius comes from trying to put a whole field of disjointed ideas together in a new way. And people with Asperger syndrome really can't help but do that. That's part of the genius of Aspies like Tim Burton, who produced The Corpse Bride and my favorite movie of all time, Edward Scissorhands. Now, we may not be that great at long-range planning, but we are very good at putting things together in ways that people have never dreamed. And it's because we have to get through life. Another thing we do is we automatically associate what we hear to either our last memory, first memory, the memory we had a week ago. We attach that to about every phrase and sentence we hear. So if we're listening to someone talk for an hour, or even for 5 minutes, our minds are all over the place. And it's not really ADD. It's kind of similar, but we're just trying to make sense of the situation in a way that applies to us and our world. So that explains a lot of things about the creativity of Asperger syndrome. Another facet that we deal with is, of course, this pinnacle of the pyramid, which is fixed, rigid patterns, which is what I promised to talk to you about in the past video. Now, when you are living in circumstances such as I've described, you really need a system in order to cope with daily living. And that is what is meant by these fixed, rigid behaviors. We don't really like change because our world's just swirling around in a million directions and we want something stable. So if we walk into a room and everything is moved around, we are more than a little bit disoriented. It's very difficult for us to find things to begin with a lot of times. And then in a circumstance like that, it's even harder, you know. Now, if you were afraid to go out in public and you have Asperger syndrome, it's probably because you are drained so much by going out in public. You might also be a little bit afraid of social situations, so you may come across as shy or aloof. And another possibility is that you could have an auditory problem, such as sounds being extremely intense and having trouble with high-pitched or low-pitched or both type of noises. And that's called hyperacusis, and I have that. Friends have extreme visual type problems. And, for example, a bright light will absolutely drive them insane. They can't deal with it. Now, for me, sometimes a bright light will trigger a migraine, and I am really uncomfortable with fluorescent lighting, and I'll wear my sunglasses in the grocery store. But I have a friend who has to wear sunglasses even in normal lighting in the house. Now, this is due to something called sensory integration disorder. Quite a lot, probably the majority of Asperger's syndrome people will have sensory integration disorder. You can also have that without having Asperger syndrome, but it's usually quite common to us. And that's one reason why we act like the cowardly lion at times. And actually we have more courage than we realize just to get through an ordinary day. And we use techniques such as counting, like to a magic number like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, or tracing letters. That's one thing I do, like H on my leg, hair twirling, rocking. These are not activities to be discouraged, but encouraged because they help us cope. Compulsive disorder is a lot different, and sometimes people with Asperger syndrome can also have OCD, but typically we do what we do because we need to do it, in a nutshell. Another thing I want to add is that Asperger syndrome is only one form of high-functioning autism, meaning having an IQ over 100. And I really wanted to stress that point because it wasn't until 1995 that the diagnosis actually hit the books. So most of us who are, well, you know, a little older and in our 30s, we were not diagnosed as children, and so no one knew really what was wrong, and they expected us to be normal, and we didn't get the help that a lot of children get today. So hopefully understanding Asperger syndrome will help you understand your loved one, whether they be a child, teen, 20, 30, all the way up to old age. And this has been Understanding Asperger Syndrome, Part 2, and this is Laura Paxton signing out. Thank you.